Hi everyone. I just want to say thank you so much for coming along to tonight's Fast Forward lecture series. I'm Manny Zhu from the Faculty of Creative Arts and Industry here at the University of Auckland. This evening I have the pleasure of introducing Frith Walker, who is an inspirational lady and is the manager of placemaking at Panuku Development Auckland. With Frith's leadership and vision, we have had the pleasure of experiencing the transformation of public spaces on the Auckland CBD waterfront, such as the much-loved Silo Park. Not only has it been an active space for public art and programming to connect with local communities, it has also been a source of immense pride as a key attraction for our international visitors to enjoy and, of course, share on Instagram. More importantly, Frith upholds the value of he tangata, he tangata, he tangata, and it's clear that putting people at the heart of place is at the centre of every action and decision she takes to make Auckland a city desired by many. I can continue fangirling Frith, but I also like the opportunity to thank our generous sponsor, Gypsum, for making it possible to offer yet another fantastic Fast Forward series, and this time convened by my colleague Andrew Barry from School of Architecture and Planning. So to thank our sponsor, I'm just going to play a very short clip, if you don't mind.
For over 100 years, gypsum plasterboard has been used as internal wall lining all over the world. And for over 85 years, Winstone Wallboards Limited has manufactured millions of square metres of its gyp plasterboard right here in New Zealand. At its plants in Auckland and Christchurch, Winstone Wallboards Limited produces a range of plasterboards: standard, fire resistant, water resistant, noise controlling, structural bracing, impact resistant, and even X-ray shielding, all conforming to strict New Zealand and international standards. The Auckland plant also manufactures a wide range of setting and air drying compounds to join and finish gyp plasterboards and prepare them for decoration. Gypsum is one of the most common minerals in the world, usually derived from the salt content in seawater. The gypsum used to make gyp plasterboard is sourced from natural deposits formed from centuries of evaporating saltwater lakes. Gypsum is a compostable, non-toxic material that's used as an organic soil conditioner, as well as being the safe and sustainable core ingredient in gyp plasterboard. Winstone Wallboards manufactures a wide range of commercial lengths of standard and specialty boards. Custom lengths of popular plasterboards between 2.4 and 6 metres are available for orders over 100 sheets. House lot orders are popular in modern residential construction, saving time and money at the building site. As well as plaster to be made into plasterboard, Winstone Wallboards manufactures a range of compounds for jointing plasterboard. Additives are mixed in with the plaster to impart the properties required for specific applications. Winstone Wallboards also produces and markets specialist plasters for craft and dentistry. To find out more about Winstone Wallboards' range of gyp products and services, request copies of our literature, or for a no-obligation chat with the gyp technical advisors about your particular needs, call our gyp helpline.
Thank you again, Jim, our sponsor. So I just want to warmly welcome Frith to start our talk.
Thank you very much, Manny, and I can say it's entirely mutual in terms of fangirling. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a really great privilege to be here tonight, and I always get slightly freaked out in a lecture theatre feeling like a lecturer when I spend a little bit of time as a student, so I will try not to bounce around because I need to speak into the mic for the sake of the lovely people out there in the universe. I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I started trying to make this presentation and couldn't do it, and couldn't do it, and couldn't do it. And I realised it's because I'm terribly angry right now. This is a piece by Jenny Holzer, which sort of summed it up for me in terms of this feeling that I have that something is not right, and it's time for us to rethink how we do things. And Jenny Holzer is saying it far more eloquently than me, but it felt honest to say that to you, that I'm starting from a position of a little bit cross. So rather than my lovely, effusive, warm, I'm really just so pleased to talk about my job, I'm coming from a different place tonight, which is actually quite exciting. But yeah, I kind of work for Auckland Council. I work for Panuku Development Auckland, who are one of the council-controlled organisations. And so tonight I'm sort of speaking like Frith, maybe more than a Panuku Development employee. And I'm pretty sure I can't see any of my bosses in the audience, so I might just say what I want to say, which is freeing for you guys. I think on a really bad day, council feels like Vogons, and I'm realising that not everybody here grew up with Hitchhiker's Guide, because some of you were born like way after me. But there's a sketch in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where the Vogon race come to put a superhighway through where Earth sits. And there's quite a funny, when you don't work for council, sketch about the Vogons saying, I'm sorry, human race, the plans have been available in your local Alpha Centauri office for the last 10,000 millennia. And the human race go, you never told us that you were putting a highway through. And the Vogons go, well, it's in the rules, so there's, I'm sorry. And then they blow up Earth. So occasionally in a council meeting where we're talking about doing something to a community, I'm hearing this speech, and it's maybe not Vogons and it's maybe not Earth being blown up, but it's still, I'm sorry, it's in the rules, and we said we'd talk to you, and this is the way it is. So this is where I'm starting from. It's not always a good day. But I wasn't always a council employee. I started working in theatre, and at the very beginning I thought I was going to be an actor, and then somebody said, hey Frith, why don't you go backstage and start being a stage manager and get off? And so I was a stage manager for a very long time. And then I turned into a theatre producer, which kind of is what saw me into the role down for the waterfront. This is me for the Louis Vuitton 150th birthday party, and on this particular night Kelly Rowland didn't turn up to rehearsals, so I had to be Kelly Rowland. And really, it was a really acute and visceral lesson in humility. And I'm a very good stage manager, but I'm not a very good dancer. And these are some of the most patient gentlemen that I've ever met in my life. But it was a good reminder in terms of I'm good at some things and these guys were good at others, and we'll stick to what we do, and then there'll be a great show as a result. On to Panuku, this is sort of the fine print. In 2011, we had Waterfront Auckland and Auckland Council Property Limited, and Waterfront Auckland had the mandate to redevelop the Wynyard Quarter and land ownership that sort of stretches from Harbour Bridge Park and West Haven Marina right through to Little Teal Park down as part of Ports. And Auckland Council Property Limited manages Auckland Council's non-service portfolio, so that's not train stations and not parks, but it's all the weird berms and forests and quarries and bits of business all over Auckland, that council owns. So looking at what had been achieved in the waterfront and looking at kind of the might of ownership that ACPL held, they brought us together to create something that, as our first chief executive said, should be 2 + 2 = 7. So the mojo of Waterfront Auckland plus the might of ACPL should be able to bring development to greater parts of Auckland. So we're now working in a series of development areas across the city. The big red dots mean transform locations, which is 20 years worth of quite significant change across quite a large project area. Little yellow dots probably mean one site that might be redeveloped, or it might be sold on to a developer under some conditions. And the blue site sits somewhere in between. We were working within a project area over probably a 5 to 10 year period, working on change that will hopefully be catalytic for that area. And our name Panuku was gifted to us by our Mana Whenua working group, by one of the local iwi, specifically for the word Panuku, which means to move forward and together, and it talks about the building of a waka and how a waka is a very difficult beast to manoeuvre. It has very little freeboard, and it takes an awful lot of teamwork to make it go forwards and not sink. So it's a very powerful word for us to hold, and I think the fact that it also talks about forward momentum is good for a council department. Our job is to get on with some things. So I've mentioned the Wynyard Quarter a couple of times. This photo is actually from about 2008, so you can see our lovely Team New Zealand shed still in place, and our fish market, which is there, and a lot of these things, the cars, important, and then sort of a lot of industrial areas. And then flashing forward to 2011, actually, in 2017, this new thing that we have down here with a lot of public space, a lot of people, and a lot of smiling people, which is probably the thing I like the most about it. Waterfront Auckland deliberately chose to lead with the public space, put the public space in first, and then the development will follow, and that maths has worked. And as you can see down there now, there are a lot of apartments and commercial buildings and what have you popping up, all off the catalytic effect of opening up that Jellicoe precinct. So really early on, they identified that if you built a lovely new piece of public space and it hasn't got any people in it, that's probably not so good. So they brought in placemaking as one of the key strategies. Stuart Niven is one of our sort of godlike creatures in terms of urban design. He's a Melbourneian-based New Zealander, and I like to quote him all the time because I fangirl him all the time as well. But he's one of the chaps that has taught me kind of how to do the job for the waterfront. Placemaking is this notoriously difficult thing to define, and there isn't really a pithy definition, but I like this one. It talks about the fact that we're working together and it's focusing on public realm, and it doesn't use the word community because community can be a bit blinking for some people. But this idea that we're talking about relationships for the sake of the environments that we're building. And it starts back in about the 1950s and 60s with William White in New York, who is going around with a Super 8 camera and recording how people are behaving in public space. And this is from a movie called The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces, and it's a must-watch, I think. And yeah, if you put a seat in, people will probably sit there. If it's sunny, people will probably be there. If it's shady, they might move away. These kind of pretty pragmatic statements, but there's so much evidence out there of places that were built without people in mind that William White's work suddenly started to become very important. And then the woman I want to be when I grow up, Jane Jacobs, who worked really hard to maintain sense of community in New York up against the people who were trying to smash motorways through those wee communities. Fred Kent, who's just stepping down as the boss of Project for Public Spaces, trained underneath William White, and he's really the chap, and his son Ethan, that's sort of where we go if we want some. What are we doing here? We look at PPS's website. So there's a very short lineage of placemakers here, but incredible giants to be standing on the shoulders of. This diagram I find really hard to explain, but when I think about it, and in fact actually when PPS first made it, it was just these sort of middle 4 nodes, and then it started to sprout petals. And over the last 6 or 7 years, it sprouted more and more petals. But when you think about it, we're trying to make spaces that are good for human beings, and human beings are inherently more complex than this. So it goes some way to capturing all the sorts of things we're factoring in as placemakers in terms of what makes me feel good as a human being. But I'm going to rant on slightly more about that later on. Just as by way of an example, in case you don't know it, this is Detroit in the 1970s, kind of the poster child for urban decay in America. And if you keep your eye on that thing, well designed for the dominant species on Earth, the motor car, and a city in all sorts of state of badness in terms of major infrastructure falling over, quite bad government stuff going on, as we understood, and a lot of people moving out and a lot of blight. PPS went into that same space. There's your little statuey sculpture. Took out quite a lot of lanes of traffic, added a public space, brought the community in to program that public space, and it is now a major node for downtown Detroit. There's an awful lot of investment moving in alongside it. There's an awful lot of people moving into the town centre as a result, and there's way less murders, which is probably the most important piece of data. This diagram was pretty much the only instruction I was given in terms of how to run the waterfront, but again, a Stuart Niven quote because I want him to think I'm cool. But it sort of talks about how we use our key public spaces in the waterfront and thinking about how the energy might flow through. So when you're in Gateway or Karanga Plaza as it's known now, it's kind of a gentle space, contemplative. You can go and sort of find your bearings there. As you move through North Wharf and the food offering, the energy kind of steps up to Jellicoe Plaza. And then if we want to put on Metallica, we'll probably do that at Silo Park. But that was all we were given. We weren't given a set of KPIs. We weren't given a list of instructions. We were given this diagram and the instruction, make people like it, please, Frith. And that was it. So that was a marvellously free space to work in. And we've got William White and Fred Kent and Jane Jacobs and Stuart Niven and all these great people sort of talking about how public space should happen in a city. And then we get this waterfront to play with, which was pretty exciting. And it's a waterfront based on some pretty meaty design ethos. This is straight out of our urban design framework, and as you can see, it would have been quite tricky to run the silo park we run today if it was underwater, so I'm pleased that they changed that decision making. But we've got these major axes running through the space that we still pay attention to. So the east-west axis being the most important, we keep that view shaft open no matter what. The north-south axis that you can see, Daldy Street Linear Park, which will lead to our future Headland Park at some point, And then this blue axis, which kind of runs along the length of Wynyard Wharf, the reason that they're doing this sort of stuff is because of how we move as humans through space. So this idea that if you can see 100 metres ahead of you, you feel quite safe. Putting in landmarks to make sure that humans could locate themselves through the space. All of this DNA was being put into the area long before it opened by a very, very clever set of designers. And three kind of major leading themes for us in terms of thinking about place-led design. Thinking about who might use the space and why. And so it was recognised that Auckland has a lot of university students, here are some of them, living in maybe high-rise apartments, maybe with not much outside space to play in, and so we added the half court. And the half court's used all the time by people from all over Auckland, all times of the day and night. This is a development site, so it potentially might turn into something else, but this was a kind of a long-term intervention with the court put in specifically to attract people. The second stuff is the stuff I'll speak to more about in a second, but maybe the stuff we're most well known for, this idea of putting in a signature program to make sure this new $124 million redevelopment was valuable to the people of Auckland and their visitors. And then the stuff where we kind of muck around with people's heads, so doing stuff in the corners that might make people stop and have a look, putting things in that might surprise people or make them think twice. This photo looks really cute, but it doesn't sound cute at all. There's wonderful children bashing out chopsticks, and then there's sort of people with sheet music who clearly don't have a piano in their apartment who are coming down and playing amazing pieces, and then other people who turn up and play things they made up themselves. The piano now lives in a container on Dawdy Street, and it doesn't have a security guard. It is locked up overnight, but it just does its own thing. And it's always a surprise to walk past and see somebody with their skateboard propped against the piano, or 6 security guards playing pieces to each other, or whatever's going on there. And people are just using it of their own accord. So this kind of idea of activation is really about giving people a reason to be in place and then have interactions with each other. This is maybe the bit that makes me cross. This idea that the way that we do so, we're going to plan a public space. So, okay, we're going to need a public space, so we're going to plan a public space, so let's make the budget, right, and then we'll do a design. We've done a design, we've got to consult. Is everybody cool that we're making a public space? Great, come back in. Okay, and then we build it, and then we deliver it, and yay, we're done, and we leave. That's great, but it doesn't make for resilience, it doesn't make for relationship building, and it certainly doesn't make for an ongoing sense of checking on a space. And so place and community-driven kind of implies this other way where you're popping the human beings at the very top of the process. You're actually taking some time to experiment, and then you're certainly taking some time to watch and see how it's working before you maybe make major investment into a place. This is the kind of approach that PPS are championing, and it doesn't seem to be going away. It's how we approach the waterfront in spaces like Waitemata Plaza, which I'll talk about, and it makes a lot of logical sense, especially when money's tight. And the benefits are really exponential. And, you know, I promise I'll get on a soapbox later on, but if we're not building places that help us be better citizens, if we're not building places that help us talk to each other better as citizens of a city, then I think we're doing our job wrong, especially as a council department. We have 10 principles for placemaking. Like I said, there's no instructions, but we've kind of written down a set of things that guide us. So forethought's a really important one, and I've talked a little bit about it. But it's going back into those fundamentals of what is a space, you know, what is this place, and why are we working here, and what should it be, and what are the truths of this place, and thinking about stuff like those major axes, thinking about how people are going to move through the space, what's going to draw them there, what's going to keep them there, where are they going to spend their money, where might they live, and then making decisions like, you know, what a half court's a good idea, and then popping it in. Spending a bit of time to get to know your place. This is an example for you, so back over to Westhaven Marina. But first step is also to take a helicopter view and go physically, what does this space look like? So in Westhaven we have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 major nodes. We've got Harbour Bridge Park, we've got kind of the major pier where the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron is. We've got the lovely new place where the promenade is, which is platform 1, I think it is. We've got St Mary's Bay, we've got Z Pier, and we've got Little Silo Marina out there. Second step is to think about who's there. Who are the people that live in this place? Who are the people that move through this place every day? Who are the people that love this place? Who are the people that earn their living off it? So you spend a lot of time spying. And then once you've made that list, you can go, okay, well, who isn't here? Who are we not seeing, and why aren't we seeing those people? And is that a problem? Are there some groups that should be here that aren't? Why aren't they coming? And then you can take all of that information and put it into a potential response. So we come back to Westhaven and we go, okay, so we've recognised that there's an awful lot of dog walkers, but there's absolutely no infrastructure for dogs. Or we've got a lot of mainly dads coming down to run their boats, but their kids aren't coming to watch them do the races every Wednesday and Friday night. So could we do some activations that help the kids come down? We now have a regular thing which is called a car boot sale, or indeed a car boat sale, where all of the boaties come in and sell their second-hand gear out of the back of their cars of a Wednesday, and there's a little economy starting up there. So all of the programming is bespoke for this space and for the people of that space. And then the bit that's probably the most important right now in my head is this idea of do, learn, do, or lighter, quicker, cheaper, as PPS would call it. This is Scimitar Plaza. I think it's in about 1980 or 1990. Pretty amazing. I mean, gosh, look at that. Wow. So many people. A bit of good public art, Philip Price. Specifically designed to keep skateboarders out and specifically designed for events. What you can't see is just off to this side is a whole bunch of apartments who hate noise. So basically you couldn't use the space. You couldn't do anything in the space. The locals didn't want to see an event on the space, fair enough, they're trying to sleep. And the event industry didn't really want to use the space because the surface is really tricky and incredibly expensive if you break it. So we have a medium budget to do some redevelopment on this space. But rather than just going, we've made up 2 designs, which one do you like? We went in and we started spying on the space. And observations were made over a really long time about how people used it. And we started talking to everybody in the area about what they thought the space should be. What should it feel like? What kind of activity do you think should be there? And we went back in and we responded. So first and foremost, it was noted that a lot of people cut straight through the space, so we laid out a red carpet for them. Secondly, a lot of people said it should be an urban beach, so that rather than spending all of the budget on putting in an urban beach, we spent a tiny bit of the budget on a temporary urban beach. And first complaint was from these boaties that they were getting sand on their boats, which confused us slightly. They stopped complaining when they realised how many ladies were maybe sunbathing and the thing. Anyway, moving on. Second thing is it was really useful for dog walkers, which was great for the dogs, not so great for the cleaning crew. So over a period of about a month, we learned that the beach was a good idea, but it didn't really work from a maintenance perspective. It wasn't that beloved by the locals, and so we didn't do a permanent beach. The second idea was around decking, kind of a wooden hardstand space, and the third idea was green. So we had 2 other temporary interventions to see, just put them out there, low cost, to see how they operated. And we end up with this space, which is kind of a combination of the green and the wooden. It still maintains the red carpet walk, and it also has a beautiful piece by Yeppie Heim in it now. And we've had 1 complaint from a local through a 4-month construction period. We mainly were getting contacted by the locals saying, we're so excited, we're really looking forward to this space coming. And now it's used by an awful lot of people, including me. That's my favourite tree to sit under. And there's a lot of children rolling down the hill and an awful lot of people taking photos. This man's name is Hilton. He's the project manager who built it. This has also been built by safe hands who care about the space. So a really interesting story, and hang on a second, if you include all of the really, really high-powered people that live around a space in the making of it, not only will they have a better journey and they'll walk away happier with the outcome, but you'll get a better space because you've had more eyes on it and people who know it. We came into thinking about the waterfront as a series of event spaces. So you can see good old Silo Park down here, and we kind of have the Halsey Wharf area and Karanga Plaza and then Queen's Wharf, and that's Scimitar Plaza that I was just talking about. And we were planning for these guys. We were coming online in 2011 with the first World Cup. Now, hands up if you were here for opening night World Cup. I was. Second most stressful experience of my professional life. First most stressful experience, finals night. Awful lot of people down on the waterfront. Really, really glad that Richie won. Would have been kind of stink if they hadn't. But we were coming at the space thinking about fan zones. We were thinking about spaces where we could cram a lot of people in and give them a lot of Heineken so they could watch the game and then go home. And that was a product, right? You're making a thing, watch the game, go home. And it was a pretty spectacular 7 weeks, but a really, really different mindset to thinking about a place like a placemaker would. This was just event programming. And so we came out of that 7 weeks looking at Silo Park really differently. We started to think about how we could make people not just come and have a transactional experience, but actually walk away a little bit changed and come and develop a relationship with the place, not just the program that we were putting on. And so it really, really impacted our thinking, not the least of which because we were just really tired and we were never going to sell Heineken again. But we wanted to make a place that actually people could have a relationship with. And so that's kind of how we went into Silo Park at the end of 2011. And I said I'd talk about stuff that you don't get to see on Instagram. So I just want to kind of tell you some of the backstory and some of the cute stuff that I really like and And I know you're not supposed to have favourites, but Silo Park really is my favourite place to work for. This is the first time I ever took a photo of somebody else's children. I don't know who the parent was. I just creepily turned up and took a photo of these kids. And I think it was the first time we've ever tried to put out just chairs, just chucked out some deck chairs, and suddenly these children turned up and sat and had an ice block in them. And I got a heck of a fright. I suddenly had this lesson in what William White had said on that Super 8 tape. If you give people a place to sit, they'll sit. And the parent didn't think I was too creepy, so that was quite useful. And that was about how many people were in Silo Park in the early days of us operating it, so it was good that I wasn't judged on audience attendance in the early days. This is actually an artist's impression from one of the early plans back in 2008. It's always quite exciting when stuff actually turns out, like it was drawn. But this, I have to acknowledge a chap called Chris Morley Hall, who was the creative producer before me, and he had this vision for the waterfront as an event space and a friendly event space that was easy to use. But this idea that the waterfront had been locked off to Aucklanders, right? We had this red fence up and that was it. And so the opening up of the Wynyard Quarter was an opportunity to come and touch the water and kind of have a relationship. And somebody said it was the first piece of public open space given to the Auckland public since Sir John Logan Campbell. He's like older than me, so that's ages ago. And this idea that we're making a working waterfront, so we're going to acknowledge the fishing fleets and we're going to acknowledge the workboats and we're going to make them a hero shot. This is a terrible, sorry, I ripped this out of a terribly ancient document, so I know it's impossible to read, but you can just start to see a new thinking about this kind of linear approach, and here's Silo Park down here, and we've got Silo 6, which we'll talk about, and all these other spaces. None of this was publicly accessible before 2011. It was all industrial space. You'd go buy a fish, get out again. And this is Silo Park on the first day I met it. So there's a bit of our design coming in with the tram tracks being kept in and the rain gardens starting to go in. The day before we opened, or 2 days before, we were going up to the project managers going, "Excuse me, I've got to put a band there on Saturday. Will you have that hole filled?" The kind of effort to get Silo Park and the whole quarter actually open for the 6th of August 2011 was phenomenal and superhuman, but sort of nightmare stage manager dreams of the stage not being ready suddenly were true in front of me with massive piles of concrete. Anyway, in the very early days, it was Auckland Council that said, keep Silo 6. This is an important landmark for the city. A huge amount of the concrete that built Auckland came through these silos. And very late in the piece, like really late in the piece, Waterfront Auckland chose to keep Silo 7. So that's why we have Silo Park. Ironically, I used to run an organisation called Silo Theatre, which was deeply confusing coming down here for the audience, but never mind. There's actually silos, that's why it's called Silo Park. We run a thing called a place tag, so there's some thinking going on with another group of clever people that is about how the place feels. So all of this is back in 2008, 9 and 10. Who's going to come to the space and why? What's it going to feel like? What goes on? What are the locals going to feel? How are we thinking about sustainability? Are we thinking about accessibility and affordability? But a lot of feeling talk. So it's not just about the drawings and the engineering, it's about how the humans are going to respond to the space. And that spits out ideas for programming and potential interventions into the public space in built form. Some of this list we've done. CEO drinks Wynyard Quarter is actually a dreadful thing to put up as the first thing on the list, I realise now in hindsight. Let's move on from that slide. And this is from one of the earliest strategies that was written by Chris, but you can sort of see his thinking about this challenging way about how this waterfront's going to be run. It's not just going to be, we'll do Fashion Week and then we'll do the boat show and then we'll have a music concert. He was thinking about how to get the creative sectors in a way that would challenge them and make them push us further. So it wasn't just simply about transactional audience numbers or any of that stuff. This was about taking a jewel in the crown for Auckland and getting the creative sectors to make it even better than we could ever imagine. So all of these words that Chris laid in still guide us today. And the next bit is to make it easy to use. So in Silo Park, we have a really great array of power distribution and water distribution. We've made a set of traffic management plans, so if you want to come and shut the roads, it's easy to do it. We've got a global resource consent, so most people don't have to get a resource consent, which burns up tens of thousands of dollars. We've got safety management plans in-house, so for little organisers, it's actually really simple to use the park. We don't put people through the usual council rigmarole, no offence, council. And Silo 6, it's just a very great privilege to get to work with that venue. It was actually my great-grandfather that built it for concrete, so sometimes I think he's looking down on me going, what are you doing putting art in there? But it's a beautiful space. Bob Harvey described it as an industrial cathedral. And again, Chris's vision is that it can be a venue for actual silo breaking, if you see what he did there. But inside, the venue's all interconnected, so we try to use it for people who are doing collaborations or progressive artworks or things that will really challenge an audience and move a conversation on. And it's pretty much used all year round. So again, this document was written in about 2009, but this opportunity to use an industrial space for creativity is just, crikey, if that's not a reason to get up in the morning, I don't know what is. And there's so many photos of stuff that's happened in there, but I picked my most recent one, which was last night. Somehow they managed to get a grand piano into those things, and as part of the Auckland Festival, a lovely gentleman played a piano inside one of the silos that doesn't have a hopper, which has the most incredible acoustics. So it was a very strange experience of being in the silos with maybe 100 people, all in a very strange creative space, which is, again, a great privilege. Moving over to the open space in Silo Park, Chris had this vision that we should be doing movies, we should be doing music on a fairly regular basis, and we should have markets. Now, we did try music, it didn't work. So in the spirit of do, learn, do, we gave it a go for about a year and recognised that there isn't really an interest in having music down at the waterfront on a regular basis. So we now do monthly larger concerts or gigs, and we still do Silo Cinema every Friday night through summer. And it's really cool. It's Simon, who runs it, describes it as being like in someone's lounge, but you know, there's 4,000 people there. But that's born of an awful lot of deep thinking. And part of that deep thinking is the structures in which the gig happens. So these beautiful tent structures, which we now get a gift to our programming in Monaco, are designed with an awful lot of deep thinking behind them. So they went to think about gurnard wings and what works as a market structure, but also a lot of sail motif, and looked at the urban design principles for the whole quarter and went away and had a big think. And so come back with all of this deep kind of creative inspiration and then work through a pretty heavy duty engineering process with sail makers, because we get a lot of wind down in Silo Park, and use material that is honouring the marine industry as well as being sustainable, and end up with something that is quite flexible, relatively easy to put up, and DIN's award-winning, thank you very much. So, yeah, pretty special structures that are sort of iconic in their own right now, and work and are kind of cute. So that's cool. Deep thinking behind this stuff. You know, you don't make a painting without quite a lot of deep thinking and quite a lot of layers of paint, so often speak of it like a painting. And then I just picked all the stuff I like to throw at you guys. So number one, as I said, they chose to keep these silos. They also chose to keep the marine industry. So in here we have a super yacht marina, which is capable of taking up to a 330-metre yacht, which is quite a lot and quite a lot of money. But the marine industry is why we have a harbour, right? This is why we have a city here, is because of that beautiful resource that is where boats come and go from. And we have a classic yacht marina alongside our super yachts. So we have a unique classic yacht fleet in this country. They are actually hundreds of years old or 100 years old, not replicas, and they are maintained by a group of really committed, wonderful professionals. We're very careful about how we make signs in Silo Park. We're very, very, very strict on signage. And so if we're telling you that you're not allowed to bring your alcohol, we're not going to say just no alcohol beyond this point or line through it or something like that. We'll think of a cute way to do it. We're just trying to, you know, wake you up. Maybe make you realise it was a human asking you to do that, and maybe you'll have a slightly different response if it was just a red circle with a line through it. Really early on, we realised that we had a major problem with small children, not in general, just they wanted to move very quickly across streets to get to the playground. And our urban designers said, you can't do anything about that, it's a shared space. It's not really a shared space, it's a 50k zone. So we had a slight health and safety problem going on. And so we weren't allowed to touch the roadway, but we were allowed to touch this bit. So we made these things, which were called the greeblies, and that name has stuck. We worked out that if you do something on the side of the road which is cute and slightly animated, children will stop. So the parents could say, stop at the sea snake. The other thing that happens is when you've got children playing on the side of the road, cars tend to slow down because they don't know what the kids are going to do. So suddenly we have this great kind of interface where the cars are going slower and the children are stopping as opposed to what was happening before. So we broke a whole lot of urban design rules to do that, but we got away with it, which was kind of cool. Our next move was to, on Pride Festival, we might have just done a pedestrian crossing in rainbow colours on the street, and we now have pedestrian crossings as a result because they couldn't really take them away. So we do break the rules every now and then when we can see a need, but we do it in a really friendly, cute way. We partner with the City Mission. That's the only, it's the only charity that we really throw our weight against because in many ways it represents the deepest need that the city has in terms of people that really deserve a place to live or support and just running their family. And the city mission's motto was Aucklanders for Aucklanders, so it's a reminder that we could do a lot to look after each other in the city. And so we stage a Christmas gig for the city mission, and they come and they fundraise and they tell their story at that time. We do something for Valentine's Day. It's the one rule that I've made, is that the Princess Bride must be played on Valentine's Day every year, or else people will get in trouble. And so we left out some crayons and people could just write notes to each other, and most of the notes were about Silo Park, or to Silo Park, which was kind of bizarre, but lovely at the same time. We very heavily celebrate Matariki, and that's just becoming a growing conversation for this city and this country, which is pretty jolly exciting. But we do quite a major thing on the last weekend of Matariki, where artists will come down and light all of the bits of the park and bring in installations and do music and do food and all sorts of things, which is pretty special and pretty humbling. Right now we have the Auckland Festival, and that's really the best review I've ever had, that Jonathan Bielski came and said, this is where I would like the heart of my festival to be. So we have this giant stage down there now, which is kind of crazy. This is Airy Dangerspiel practicing the day before they performed. But it is such an amazing thing to have our major arts festival have its heart down in our beautiful little Silo Park, so that's pretty groovy. And this is a very brave lady who's head of creative strategy for Auckland Council, a very groovy person, and she lives in front of Pennybrook. And this is the Pop Drop installation, which is a giant inflated polythene thing, which you can just jump up and down on, which seems deeply dangerous, but always has children all over it having a fantastic time, and sometimes grown-ups as well. So there's sort of an amazing amount of creativity going on in Silo Park right now, which is other people bringing it. Speaking of amazing creativity, this is the only known photograph I have of the Laneway Festival, so it was worth talking about Laneway. We were their first monogamous relationship in this city, which I'm quite proud of. They're quite a large festival and they're not easy to have a monogamous relationship with. We now have residents living in the Wynyard Quarter, so unless Laneway was prepared to go acoustic, it wasn't going to fit for much longer. And probably the brand of that gig has moved on a little bit, so the fact that it now happens in your space is really exciting on a whole bunch of levels. But I'm pretty proud that we managed to pull it off for a few years there. For a while there, we did a thing called the Mayor's Movie, where we did actually ask the Mayor what movie he'd like played, or she, on the Friday night of anniversary weekend. So we'd often give them quite a curated list to choose from. Please choose from one of these two films. But it was a great thing, and just an opportunity to kind of celebrate our politicians in our public space and kind of make a thing about that. We celebrate the Wynyard Quarter's birthday every year, and that was a kind of a stupid, cute thing that we thought up in the first year to fill a space in August, but it's ended up being a thing, and we now have about 20,000 people coming to wish the Wynyard Quarter a happy birthday, which is a little crazy and kind of lovely. But we program it just by thinking, this year we'll be thinking like a 7-year-old. So this was a balloon forest when we turned 4 that you could just run through. But more often than not, we're trying to do things from the perspective of a child, because that means children will like it, but it also means grown-up might be able to revisit their inner child, or they might be able to be there with their child, or they might, I don't know, they might find another grown-up and have a childlike conversation. But I think I'm going to quote Miranda at the moment, but if we could have 1/10 of the joy of a 6-year-old, the world would be a better place. So we do use a lot of our programming power in the Wynyard Quarter to try and remind people that it's okay to be happy, it's okay to be childlike, it's okay to have a sense of wonderment. This bloke works for Titan Engineering. So Titan Engineering is the business that is right next door to Silo Park. And right next door to Titan Engineering, you've got Frith concrete trucks. And just up the road, you've got BST and Stolthaven, who have all the exploding stuff in the tanks. So all the stuff north of Silo Park is really quite hazardous material. And we only get to run Silo Park the way we do because we have a relationship with all of those people that work to the north. And they're amazing people. They're very patient with us, and we have a very, very robust set of dialogue going on. They know they can call us at any stage. And the fact that their workers come and play giant Jenga in the park is kind of cool. They have no reason to like us. We represent their demise. At some point, those tanks are going to be moved on, and it will turn into a headland park, but they still celebrate this work because they know what it's doing for the city. So that's another sort of gold star that I'm quite proud of. And Manny said it, but crikey, if we're not building our city for people, then who the heck are we building them for? We've only done this work because of a huge range of phenomenal people. Two of the people I work with are Paul Nicol and Lehane Stowers, and they're the couple that run the Wynyard Quarter. Paulie worries about what things that plug in, and Lehane worries about the kind of art and the creativity. And I asked them to choose me their favourite photos of Silo Park. And Lee Hain chose a photo of a sunset with the bridge, and Paul chose a photo of his dog. But they pretty much spend all of their working time and all of their sleeping time and all of their time with their families thinking about Silo Park and thinking about the waterfront. And it's this incredible kind of generosity of staff and contractors and contributors that I think you guys see when you come down there. There's people who genuinely care about the space and love it, pouring that love into the space. I think that's visible. These two gentlemen are Simon Van Prague, who I'll talk about in a second, and this is Angus Muir. And I have the exact same photo pretty much from 2011 where there's no reeds and there's no super yachts and it's all very new. But Angus is now like a very internationally sought after lighting designer, and he cut his teeth in Silo Park. He's designed the Auckland Festival setup, and he's buzzed around Vivid and all sorts of places to do groovy lighting stuff. And Simon really deserves like 99.9% of the credit for Silo Park's programming. I don't know how much that man has seen his family in the last 7 years, but he runs a phenomenal team, an organisation called Fresh Concept, and they live in the park from December through April this year and just make sure that it's going well. And they are dealing with the security guards and the licensing guys and the cleaning and all of the food vendors and every single artist that you see and every single bit of licensing to get a movie up. And every single Facebook post that is made, good or bad, is his crew wrangling it and making sure it's all a beautifully prayed orchestra. And without that kind of level of generosity and cleverness, it wouldn't be the space that you see today. I wanted to, this is that bit I told you about, Manny. I used to work in theatre. This is a picture from a show called Hair that we did in, oh crikey, when was the Twin Towers? It was the same year as the Twin Towers. Thank you. For Auckland Theatre Company. And the reason I've put this slide up is the diversity of humans that make a play is the point. So you have Simon Prast, who made Auckland Theatre Company, and you have the choreographer, Mary-Ann Schultz, assistant director Oliver Driver. You'll see, and talking to the microphone, you have a lighting dude, you have a sound dude, you have a stage manager, you have a set designer dude, set designer dude, you have a lady who gets the props, you have the man in charge of all the guns. And then you have a whole bunch of actors who are prepared to take their clothes off. The thing about a play is that it takes a massively diverse range of people to make it happen, and it takes a stage that was built by somebody and a bunch of people selling tickets and a bunch of people telling people about the play, and no one of that department is trying to get another department fired. More often than not, they're trying to sleep with each other, but there's no sense of you should get out because that's my patch. There's just a deep understanding that we all do this together and there's an audience coming and we're working for that audience's experience. And so one of the great shocks of coming to work for council was walking away from that sort of environment and into a deeply politicised environment. And I keep going back to this. I keep going back to, I know Silo Park's worked because of the range of humans that we've got down there contributing at a generous, we've got to get this on and it's got to be amazing kind of level, not a divisive, I hate your guts and, you know, I'm going to send you a slightly bitchy email kind of level. That's simply not what has gone into making this space. It's come from a really different thing, from the very clever designers to the very clever strategic people who said keep the silos in the first place, to the engineers who made that weird gantry thing, to the artists that contributed to the boys, to everything that will happen this Friday night when we play a movie, which I ought to know. That would have been clever if I'd known the movie. That's a huge, huge, generous, collaborative act, and that's why that space exists like it does. I'm going to now do a short sociology lecture. This is a picture of a polar bear. There's not a lot of polar bears in Silo Park, but this is a polar bear that used to be in the Auckland Zoo when I was a small child. And we remembered it as the dancing polar bear, and we thought that it was dancing because it was happy. And it wasn't dancing because it was happy. There's a thing called zoochosis, which animals get if they're in an environment which is bad for them or poorly designed environment. This polar bear was green. It had mould on it. I remember it very vividly being green. And so when an animal starts to suffer from zoochosis, it becomes less sociable, it goes off its food, it stops breeding, it tends to be more aggressive. We're fundamentally animals, so what happens when you walk into a space like this? How does it make you feel? How does it make you behave? That's some of the best tagging I've ever found for a PowerPoint presentation. An awful lot of our spaces in Auckland look like this, or feel like this, or worse in fact. So this is why I was angry. This is why I think we can do better in our town. And if we could understand ourselves as humans a bit better and take that into the building of our spaces, we'd have a better city. We're pretty fundamental creatures, us human beings. You know, you've got an awful lot of programming that's just running behind your eyeballs without you knowing. There's a lot of stuff from your childhood or your parents' childhood, whatever, that's making you decide what you think about a person, what you think about me, what you think about the person next to you. And you're not in charge of most of it. You've got this kind of impression that your conscious brain's in charge. It's not. And so we've made this particular housing development was built in the 1970s and pulled down 15 or 18 years later because it was a complete failure. So how much resource went into building something that then failed, that caused a whole lot of social problems, that then had to be pulled down and rebuilt? What happened there? And I think it's a no-brainer to look at that thing and go, yeah, that probably wasn't going to work, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm really grateful that I've been given this opportunity down in Silo Park to think slightly differently, and with leadership by people like Bob Harvey and John Dalzell and my boss Rod Marler, we have this space to play in where we're gifted this opportunity of go and make people like it Frith and that weird black drawing. And then I get to work with people like Simon, and we get to have people turn up and care about it like they do. Like I said, you've got this thing that just stops you from walking under trains most of the time, and when it sees an email, it thinks it's an angry tiger. It's not a tiger, it's an email. But your reptilian brain's just tricking along there. And really fundamentally, we love stories. Hopefully I've done a good job of telling you a story this evening. I've taken you on a wee journey, and that's going to get into your brain in a whole lot of ways that are going to make you remember it, because I'm evil and I've read books. But you are here 200 or 300 or 400,000 years down the track because we've developed these bits of our brain. We've learned how to remember stuff and socialise. And I mainly put up this slide to prove to you that I know how to do research, like Google image search, brain and data, and brain on stories. But I really, really like this one, that if I was showing you facts, you got 2 little bits firing off, whereas if I tell you a story, quite a lot of your brain's getting activated. So we're kind of trying to operate on this level. If human beings are complex, clever, emotional creatures, and we want to turn on all of those bits of your brain. So when it comes to these guys, they may be not after that kind of experience, but maybe we can twist their brains a little bit. And so on a closing night of World Cup, when it was deeply stressful down there, we played The World's Fastest Indian as the movie before the game, and the whole crowd sat down and watched the film, and then stood up at the end and clapped and hugged each other. And then we went into the final. And other fan zones were just dealing with like really unhappy, really cross people all the time, all the way through. So we kind of moved our thinking on from just pocketed event spaces and a transactional experience of people come in, get a thing and then leave, and into thinking slightly more emotionally. We moved on from just thinking about you've been given a delivery, something to deliver, do it and then get out. This is the only known photo of that fan zone, by the way. 1 seagull and some rubbish bins, and that was a success. But yeah, there's not a lot to feel anything about there. And so yeah, great training, but good to move on from that. We're trying to make spaces, like I said before, that cause moments of human interaction and hopefully joy and hopefully, delight. If it's negative, we hope they find a way through it, but ultimately it's up to those human beings to have those experiences and take them away with them. There's actually, the top of this says I farted, so you're standing in my fart love from your mum. So that's not the quote I want to share with you tonight. I found this on the Brooklyn Bridge right when my dad was dying of cancer. And I think it's really, really true. We're not in a hurry. You're probably going to die, like I know you are. I'm sorry, that's not meant to be offensive. I know you're going to die. I know I'm going to die. So why not take the time to get it right while we're here? Why not think carefully and with generosity while we're here to try and do the best job we can for the people who come after us? And I've mentioned creativity a couple of times, but one thing I can see is deeply lacking in the way that we approach the building of our cities and our places is creativity. And so I'm deeply grateful to know people like Manny and Andrew, and to know that you guys are thinking on this level about how we can kind of take all of our brains, our whole right and left brain, that's right, we've got 2 halves, and get them working together with the other human beings alongside us to do a better job for the places for which we work. This is my favourite photo of Silo Park, and everybody in my team razzes me because I use it all the time. But this little boy set up this space himself. He put the beanbags there so he could jump on them. And he just jumped on the beanbag for like half an hour. Or like just jump, get up, jump, get up, jump, get up, jump. And he made that space. That's his space. He felt secure about that space. He was in charge of that space. So what's his experience of Silo Park? What does he take home? And when he's a grown-up person doing something amazing for the city, what's the memory that he carries with him? And he's got a dad here who's feeling pretty chill with a beer, and behind them was there's another joke about this where it's a really diverse crowd because there's a ginger in it, but I'll move on from that. I can say that's a ginger. So back to my opening speech that I'm a bit cross. Now I read this with different eyes. Now I read this with maybe there is a change afoot and it's a good thing and it is scary and there's people freaking out and maybe the status quo is a bit worried because it doesn't feel like it's very stable anymore. And maybe those who need a bit of control are kind of going, hang on a second, it's getting a bit wobbly out there. Crikey, there's a girl in charge of the country and she's pregnant. Ah! Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need a bit of disruption. Maybe we need a bit of courage to look at our systems and go, how well are they working? Are they the really best thing for us to do right now? Can we see 2 generations ahead and make sure that we're looking after them as much as we're looking after our own interests? And so back to Silo Park for a second, I'm so very grateful to be asked to come and stand here today, and I'm so very grateful that park is speaking in a way that makes people like Manny go, that's something I want to hear about. And it is this collective effort, but maybe we can make a different city. Maybe we can focus on what humans need and do something that is beyond the cars and beyond the numbers and beyond the commercial and into actually the life of the city. So as a wee test for you, which is the most resilient of these, and if anybody thinks it's A, you're wrong, we're aiming for this idea, that there's a whole bunch of people talking to a whole bunch of other people and no one's centralised. Everybody's got a bit to play. So if I fall over, the system still stays intact. Council doesn't think like a system. It needs to. It works for a system, which is Auckland City. So, yeah, as best we can. Oh, there's an interesting little word there. I don't know what ra means. Sun. It means the sun, which I clearly meant to do. Quick personal story. That's my grandfather, Bain McGlashan. I don't know who he is, but he's really important. And they're all standing on a model of the harbour that my grandfather built. So he was an engineer for the Harbour Board. And what was going on here is they were going to build some new wharves, so they were testing what those new wharves would do to the water patterns. So underneath here, there was a completely accurate tidal representation of the seabed of the Waitemata. So the point being that have a test, see what happens and figure out if the wharves are in the right place or they're the right structures or whatever. So I found this picture and I thought this is a really excellent metaphor for placemaking for me, because there's my grandfather and he's testing these little model wharves before they go and burn probably 30 pounds or whatever it would have been in those days on building permanent wharves. This is what we try and do as placemakers. I'm going to go in and do a test beach, or I'm going to maybe shut down a car park for a day and see if it works as a public space before you shut it down permanently. And then we'll see if it works. We'll test and we'll trial. Second thing for me, though, is that's my grandfather standing on the Wynyard Quarter. He helped build this place. That little wharf there is called McCallum's Wharf, which is my grandmother's family. That was my great-grandfather who used to run the red shingle up and down the harbour. My father was really integral in rezoning this for marine use, and my uncle's first job was in the Voss shed. So my connection through to the Wynyard Quarter is really deep in me, and my responsibility is to Bain McGlashan and Archie McCallum and those people that go before me. So these are the stories that I need to be responsible to for the Wynyard Quarter. And so when we go and we do our placemaking in other places, I use this slide to go, I'm looking for Bain McGlashan and his granddaughter to make sure that I honour these places and the stories of them. And I genuinely believe this. And now that I'm in a good mood, because you guys have given me the opportunity to expunge all of my demons, I genuinely get up in the morning because of this slide. And the most important word is that one for me, just a little bit. If I made that little boy happy because he could jump on that beanbag for half an hour, then I made the city a little better. And if every single one of us got up and thought like that, especially those of us what work for council, the city would be exponentially a lot better. Now, for those of you born after like 1990, which I fear is like most of you, you won't know what I've done here, so I'm now going to explain it. In my slightly grumpy try to finish off my presentation state, I realised the only way to finish it off was a reference to the Dark Crystal. Hands up if you remember the Dark Crystal film. Thank you, good sir. And you. So it's a movie about the forces of good, and help me guys if I get this wrong, forces of good and evil, and there's these two little creatures, Jen and Kyra, who have to kind of help forces of good and evil. And there's these creatures called the mystics, which are warm, loving, spiritual beings who raise Jen, all very lovely, and these evil chaps called the Skeksis, who are a little bit money hungry, a little bit power hungry. And at the end, the Skeksis and the mystics come together and they create this being, the Xerxes, I think it is, who is what we should be, balanced. There's an understanding of kind of commercial and kind of, you know, for the good of me. And there's also an understanding for the good of all, a bit of right brain, left brain, a bit of unconditional love and just love for myself. And that really, at the end of the day, I thought, man, if council could be that, the city could be number one on happiness, number one on livability, and number one on awesomeness. But we need to come together, mystics and Skeksis, to create the Xerxes. Thank you very much. That's the end of my speech.
for a couple of questions, but there's one I'd like to start off with in the sense of what's the long-term view in the sense of 30 years from now, what will be happening down at Silo Park in the sense that it's taking a huge kind of effort, right? There's an enormous amount of force that you guys kind of are putting into that to kind of make it run the way that it is. Is that a kind of forever commitment, or is there a sense in which, as all the development happens, you'll be able to kind of step down the involvement because other enterprises will kind of come in and start running things? Or what's 30 years from now?
I promised myself I'd get through tonight without making a joke about the America's Cup, so I'm now going to honour that promise and not do it. I think there's a great quote from an amazing lady from New York that says public space needs champions. And I think when you're dealing with a hero shop like Silo Park, it deserves to always have someone running it. Like Fed Square in Melbourne or Central Park in New York, they've got bodies that are built to run them right and look after them. Yeah. So I think the city deserves, and ATS Square even. So the effort will get less as the development slackens. So at the moment we're in heavy duty crazy time. And the parks now, like with the Auckland Festival turning up, more and more people are coming in of their own accord. But I would hope that there is always a body who's keeping an eye on it and making sure that it's not just turning into Times Square. Right.
Okay. And how does that? Is there a sense in which, as that kind of tapers off, that effort will come and be applied elsewhere? Is there a kind of is there a bucket of effort of a certain size that you're having to kind of spread around the city, like margarine?
Yeah. A little bit. I mean, I've got a team of people that work with me, so we're now pouring effort into those big red dots and some of the blue ones. I don't know if it's going to end up the same way as Silo Park. I would hope that some of the model of waterfront Auckland gets reinvigorated and gets to be applied elsewhere. But it takes a bit of courage and a bit of spend to make that happen.
Right. Other questions?
I come from a yellow dot area.
Hello, yellow dot.
Currently, we're about to lose our only remaining strip of brick shops, and it seems that there is no plan for that in Newland. So there's a potential artisan quarter, and as far as I know, there's no one like you in Newland.
Thank you.
It's a bit of a potential disaster, and once they're all demolished, we can't do anything about it.
Do you feel like
of us trying to save the Newland Protection Society? It's sort of an over-claiming.
I love a good acronym. I love me a good acronym.
And the kind of
I might give you a card.
Yes, please.
Cool.
Yes, please. I'll email you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
In relation to what you were saying, it's like Wynyard Quarter is quite an active space in terms of lots of effort and there's lots of focus involved to make it what is kind of one of the destination spots in Auckland now, I'd say, at least from my age gap, for sure, even. How do you think Auckland can create more passive spots where it doesn't take effort? Because there's a lot of parks, there are a lot of green spaces, open spaces in Auckland, and really a lot of them don't get maybe a lot of the love that they deserve because they're a passive place rather than like an active place that Wynyard Quarter's turned into. Maybe the Domain, you could say, is an active place as well.
One of the strongest bits of feedback we got around the Waitanata space was it should be a contemplative space. It shouldn't be activated, it should be quiet. But you're absolutely right, and I think this is the, in my perfect world, sorry, tonight's talk was only about Silo Park. In my perfect world, we start to be able to look at what is special about each part of Auckland and really honour its public spaces, because I think we're still a bit obsessed about our private car and our quarter acre section, and we need to start seeing our public spaces as civic assets that are really important. But you're absolutely right, being able to do that thought and research and go, this space needs high level activation, it's got a whole lot of people around it that want to come out, or it needs to be just quiet and contemplative, it needs a few more trees, or whatever it needs. But that kind of place-based thinking, and then it's going to need the locals to invest in that, mainly through usage. But I'm with you, I don't think everything needs bloody it doesn't need a movie every Friday night to make it a successful space. You don't need hundreds of thousands of people to make a successful space. You need one kid jumping on a beanbag or one person reading a book. So if you've got a space in mind and it's on a dot area, I'll give you a card. human beings need lots of different types of activity, right? We don't just always want to be running around. You need space to think as well. I want to finish on a please can you go and change the world, you lovely people that are off to design things and think about how you might move into, I don't know, making stuff better. Just do it. The more people who make the world better, the better the world will be.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you again to the wonderful folk from GIB who support this series. We couldn't do even a fraction of what we do without their support for this lecture series. Come back next week when we've got Cornelia Bast, who's actually talking about something a little bit similar, but she is operating in Vienna, Austria, and so I'll be talking about some of her work there, which particularly involves community involvement in urban spaces. So we'll see you next week, and join me in thanking Frith for her.